Hi, I'm Peter J. Ray. Welcome to Adventures in History. Today's topic is Great Empires in World History. Now, an empire is when one country rules another country or other countries, and then you have you have an emperor, which is connected linguistically with empire. So, an empire is not democratic. One of the ironies is the British Empire, which most famous. Great Britain really gave the world democracy in modern times, but of course they weren't practicing democracy within the empire. There were folks in the colonies did not vote, and then with an empire you have the mother country, and then the colonies, which mother country has the power, and then the colonies are ruled by the mother country, and the colonies exist for the benefit of the mother country. So empires have a bad reputation as being, and you can see that in the Star Wars movies. The Empire ruled by Darth Vader, who would be like the Emperor. Now, we live today in a non-imperial world, and the last great empire, which came to an end, I would say, would be the Soviet Union, which was a Russian empire, which ended about 30 years ago with when they abandoned communism, and also independence came for countries like Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, and the Ukraine, and the Central Asian republics like Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, and so forth. And actually, the imperial era really came to an end, I would say, because of the Second World War, which was really an attempt by Germany and Japan to create empires. And of course, they were defeated and they failed in their attempt. And after, it looked like, oh, this is terrible. Look how terrible it is what the Germans and Japanese are trying to do. And of course, they did have empires briefly during the war. And then after the war, people thought, well, now, wait a minute. What about these other empires? Specifically the British, French, Portuguese, Belgian, and Dutch empires. And so the war itself led to independence movements and the end of those European empires in the late 1940s, 1950s, into the 1960s, and actually into the 1970s. Okay, so now others would argue now we still live in an imperial era because there are folks or people who want to become independent from countries, like some folks in Quebec, Canada, the French-speaking, who've wanted to become independent, and so far are still part of Canada. And some people in Scotland who want to break away from Great Britain, and folks in Northern Ireland, of course, that's died down. They pretty much have accepted being part of Great Britain, but wanted to transfer to Ireland from Great Britain. And then some of the folks in Catalonia, Spain, who want to become independent of Spain, and the Basques in Spain and France, who want to become independent of Spain and France. And then the Kurds in Iraq, they wanted to also become independent. And probably the one example of an imperial situation, I think, is Tibet, and it's controversial, and Chinese might be offended by me saying that, but Tibet is actually a huge area and has been an independent country, but it's been a part of China since 1954, and but there's and that's why the Dalai Lama seems to offend the Chinese government, because he represents and he wants he's been working for independence for Tibet. So far, it has not happened, and you still have a few colonies, French Guiana in South America, which is French, the Falkland Islands, and other small lands. The British still have a few possessions overseas, colonies. Tahiti and French Polynesia, part of France, still ruled by France, and so forth. So let's get into the topic. Now let's talk about empires, starting with based on land mass. In the last 500 years, you had these European countries where, in Europe they didn't have room to expand except against each other, so they expanded overseas. But most empires in history, where you have a country and it's expanding within its, beyond its borders, whereas with the Spanish and the other empires, they went overseas to build empires, which was kind of unique. But let's talk about starting with the empire with the most land area in history. That would be the British Empire, which had 35.5 million square kilometers. Unbelievable. And the height of its empire was in 1920, including, at that time, Canada, a huge part of Africa from Egypt to South Africa, north to south, India, which also includes today Pakistan, Bangladesh, Australia, New Zealand, and other places like Jamaica and Hong Kong and so forth. The British Empire, and even though empires have bad reputations, I think the British Empire had a positive influence on world history because of their the British belief and practice of the use of reason and democracy, and so forth. So the British Empire. Next would be the Mongol Empire, 24 million square kilometers, and that was their height of power was in the year 1270. So this is going back in time about 700 or 800 years. Now, Mongolia included what's now Mongolia, China, Russia, Central Asia, and into Iran. A huge empire. Of course, this is made famous by Genghis Khan, and and they were pretty tough, tough horse people, and killed a lot of people, and pretty terrible when the Mongols would show up in your town. But once they established their empire, one advantage was that you could travel, and this is how Marco Polo traveled to the Far East and brought back stories of things that were available in China and in the Far East that Europeans didn't have, and kind of stimulated the European age of exploration and, eventually European empires overseas. Next, the Russian Empire. The height was in 1895, and of course, I mentioned the Soviet Union earlier. This at that time, the Russian Empire, which apparently was bigger than the Soviet Union, included Poland, Finland, the Baltic states, and into Central Asia. The next, the Spanish Empire, one of the most famous and interesting empires, 20 million square kilometers. The year 1750 was its height, and now this would include Latin America, the Spanish-speaking countries today, the Philippines, Cuba, Puerto Rico, Guam, and Micronesia, and mostly from and what's now the southwestern United States into Mexico, Central America, and a big part of most of South America, except for Brazil and the Guyanas. The Spanish Empire. Okay, the Qing Dynasty, Qing. This is a Chinese empire, 14 million square kilometers, 1820, including Tibet. So this is where the Chinese would say, Tibet was part of China going way back. Also including parts of Mongolia and Russia. The Qing Dynasty, there were a number of Chinese empires over the years. But they would come and go, or the ruling families would come and go. Next, the French Empire. This is France, 11.5 square kilometers. 1920 was the height. Of course, France was the mother country, and a big part of mostly in West Africa, Northwest Africa, Algeria, and they still speak French language in these countries. What's now Sierra Leone, West Africa, Guyana. No, not Guyana. Sorry. Countries, Ghana, and so forth, West Africa. Also Indochina, Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia, which, actually the Vietnamese independence movement, which got connected to the communist movement, was, and of course, this led to the United States involvement in the Vietnam War, which really started as an independence movement of the Vietnamese against France. Madagascar, and that's an huge African island off the southeast coast. And French Guyana, still a French colony in South America. Okay, the Abbasid Caliphate, 11.1 million square kilometers, 750 A.D. This was one of the early Arab empires. The life of Muhammad. Apparently, this was the largest Muslim empire, and about more than 100 years after the life of Muhammad, when Islam and the Islamic Empire really spread, incredibly, out of conquering all of Arabia, and then into North Africa, Iran, the Middle East. So, there were a number of Muslim empires. The first being Arab from Arabia, and then later Turkish. The young New Empire. Xiongnu. I can't read my own handwriting. Ziongnu Empire. 9 million square kilometers. 176 BC. Don't know much about this. That would be Mongolia, Western Manchuria, which is now China, Eastern Kazakhstan, and Siberia. A tribal confederation of nomadic peoples. One of the things, if you study empires, I took some time to prepare this video. It's like you think, oh my gosh, the history is so vast. And if you're a historian, as I am, you realize, that you know very little. There's just so much, and these empires I'm talking about, some of them I didn't even know they existed. So it's just history is just incredible, and it can be pretty intimidating because you think, oh, there's so much you don't know. But it's okay. You can just try to learn bits and pieces here and there. It's like a giant jigsaw puzzle, and you can just learn a few, like I said, pieces here and there. Okay, the Brazilian Empire, kind of interesting. 8.3 million square kilometers, 1899. This is when Brazil was a Portuguese colony, and really huge compared to Portugal. And the King of Portugal, I believe, fled Portugal for political reasons and came to Brazil. And of course, he was an emperor, so that meant that Brazil was an empire. And this is King Pedro, and then there was the two King Pedros in Brazil. Okay, the Iberian Union, interesting. When Spain and Portugal, which constitute Iberia, joined for a period of time in 1640, so that when their empires were combined, in the Spanish and Portuguese empires. The Göktürk Khaganate, gotta love that name, 6 million square kilometers, 557, whoa, like 1,500 years ago. Mongolia, Central Asia, and Western China. Göktürk. Yeah, this is interesting. The Turkish, this is a Turkish based or influenced empire, which there have been quite a few of those. So the latest being the Ottoman Empire. The Golden Horde Khanate, 6 million square kilometers, 1310. This was originally, of course, you had the Mongol Empire, which later was Turkicized. So this was the Golden Horde was a Turkicized Mongol Empire. So the Turks and Mongols came together. I think that's so interesting, that you hear about both of them. But this was a joint venture, the Golden Horde, which my high school history teacher Vernon Gillespie I remember him talking about this. The Achaemenid Empire, 500 BC. This was Persian Empire, including what's now Turkey, Egypt, Iran, Greece, and into what's now Pakistan. So this was a great Persian Empire. Yeah, going way back, and of course they were rivals to when ancient Greece rose, the Persians were a big empire to the east, and the Achaemenid Empire. Okay, the Portuguese Empire, 6 million square kilometers, 1820 its height, including Brazil, Angola, Mozambique, East Timor, and Macau. Yeah, in fact, the Portuguese kept those African colonies up until 1975, which was pretty much the end, I would say, of the European empires. But Brazil, their biggest one, and then these ones in Africa, and also what's now Indonesia, East Timor, which became independent, partly because there differences from their history, Portuguese background, and Macau, which is the counterpoint to Hong Kong in China. The Macedonian Empire, 5.2 million square kilometers, 320 BC. This was a Greek empire. And this is into the Balkan Peninsula in Turkey. Yeah, Alexander, and this is connected to Alexander the Great, who was Macedonian. And Macedonia is Greek. And of course, well, definitely, I'm sure the Greeks have different ideas, but I would say it's definitely Greek. But there's always varieties of country within a country. The Ottoman Empire, one of my favorites, and I think most interesting empires, 5.2 million square kilometers. Their height was in 1683. They lasted all the way up until the end of the First World War. This was Turkish, included all of the Balkan Peninsula, North Africa, and the Middle East. And they had a really interesting empire, Turkish, and they. You can see how empires have their limits and how big they can get. And the Turks tried to take Vienna, Austria, a number of times, but they would, it would take this is the center. Their center of their empire was in Istanbul, formerly Greek Constantinople, and it would take time for them to march their army up and lay siege to Vienna. They're traveling on land, on foot, by horseback. By the time they got there, they wouldn't have much time to, barrage, Vienna with artillery, cannon fire, before they'd have to go home for the winter. So they never took Vienna, and partly because it was just too far away from Istanbul. The Roman Empire. I'm wearing a T-shirt which has the Colosseum in Rome. Here in Cleveland, we had the Colosseum, which was where the Cleveland Cavaliers played in the NBA, partly because the owner was Nick Maletti, who was Italian, so that was his tribute to ancient Rome. And of course, the movie Gladiator with Russell Crowe depicts him fighting as a gladiator in the Colosseum in Rome. The Roman Empire, maybe one of the most famous empires in history, which included, which was based, kind of interesting, named after a city. It's not just a country dominating, an empire. It's just a city. So the city of Rome. And this is partly how Catholics became Roman Catholics, because this is when Christianity spread, and when eventually the Romans adopted Christianity. Rome became the center of the Christian church. And so the Roman Empire was based in Rome and then Italy, what's now Italy, in much of Europe, North Africa, into the Balkan Peninsula, but not Germany and not Scotland. The Roman Empire. Yeah, which is really how Christianity became, a popular religion, because you had the security of the Roman Empire, and they had a major contribution from the Greeks, who were very talented people, and the Romans were great engineers. The Roman Empire, which was really the foundation of modern what became Europe and Western civilization. The Roman Empire, amazing. The Tibetan Empire, 4.6 million square kilometers in the year 800. So the Tibetans, one time they had their empire. Of course, we are living in a low age, so no matter how spiritual the country is, the Tibetan Empire, when the Tibetans ruled Tibet and China. So you could say the Chinese are getting revenge for the time when the Tibetans ruled them. The Timurid Empire, 4.4 million square kilometers, 1405. This was another Turco-Mongol empire. Fascinating, including Uzbekistan, Iran, the Caucasus Mountains, Afghanistan, Central Asia, parts of India, and founded by Tamerlane, who was also known as Timur the Lame. I guess he had trouble walking. Tamerlane, the famous conqueror, who's I think the Afghans consider a national hero. So Tamerlane, the Timur, so the Timurid Empire, named after Tamerlane. The Hephthalites, year 470. And this is also known as the White Huns, who have a reputation of being sort of Germanic people. Northeastern Afghanistan, Western China, interesting. Yeah, part of history is the people moving, and the Huns, of course, became famous for their attack on the Roman Empire. These are called the White Huns. Okay, the Hunnic Empire. This would really be the Huns. 4 million square kilometers. The year 440, of course, Attila the Hun was the famous leader of the Huns. I remember my grandmother, who lived during the First World War, they were fighting Germany, and she used to call the Germans the Huns, which is the ancient name of a Germanic people. And of course, Attila the Hun was the famous conqueror who one of the people or parts of armies that conquered Rome and led to the end of the Roman Empire. The Hunnic Empire. Interesting. Okay, the Mughal Empire. This is pretty well known. 1690 was their height. This was when Muslims ruled India. Of course, India is a great Hindu religion and Hindu-ruled country, ancient religion. And then, but in modern times, it was ruled by Muslims, conquered by Muslims, until the British came. And apparently the Mughal Empire was connected to Genghis Khan and Tamerlane, so there's all this stuff going on in Central Asia. Okay, the Great Seljuk Empire, 1080. This was a Turco-Persian empire. Interesting, Persia is now Iran. Very interesting. The Turks and the Persians, a joint venture. The Seleucid Empire, Seleucid, 301 BC. This was a Greek empire. Yeah, the ancient Greeks, and it went from Turkey to India. I think this was connected to Alexander the Great. The Italian Empire, 1938. This was during the time of Benito Mussolini, when the Italians conquered Libya and Africa, Somalia and Ethiopia briefly, before being defeated by the Ethiopians, led by the Emperor Haile Selassie, who inspiring the folks in Jamaica to have develop a religion, the Rastafari religion, where they worshipped this Haile Selassie, and whose title was Rastafari, and then of course made famous by music of Bob Marley and the Wailers. The German Empire, 1918, which when it was actually it was the end when the Germans lost the First World War, and their empire was stripped from them, including countries in Africa, Namibia in the south, Tanzania in the east, and Cameroon in Central Africa, as well as Micronesia. Yeah, Guam and Saipan and so forth, the various parts of these small islands in the Pacific Ocean. Okay, the Uyghur Khaganate, the year 800. Oh, don't you love that? Uyghurs, Uyghur. Now this is actually, today in China, people of Western China, the so-called Chinese Turkestan, the Uyghurs. This was a Turkic Empire, Western China and Mongolia. Again, you come across a lot of Turkish or Turkic influenced or based empires. Fascinating. The Byzantine Empire, 555 their height. Yeah, this is a wonderful empire. This was also Greek and was originally part of the Roman Empire, but then the empire broke, split. And this was the eastern part of the Roman Empire, including the Balkans, the Balkan Peninsula, North Africa, and what's now Turkey. The Byzantine Empire, which ended, 1453, one of the traumas in the Western civilization, when the Byzantine Empire came to an end, and it was the beginning of the rise of the Ottoman Empire, the loss of power by the Greeks, and the rise in power of the Turks. Okay, the Inca Empire, 1527, the height. This was in South America, western part, into the Andes Mountains toward the Pacific Ocean. Most partly in Peru, Bolivia, and Chile, western part of South America, which of course was defeated by the Spanish. The Gupta Empire in India, an Indian empire in year 440. Assyria, 670 BC, what's now Iraq. The Mali Empire, 1380 in West Africa. Of course, there's a country today named after the Mali Empire. Okay, Poland, Lithuania, 1480, another joint venture. I don't know who had more power there, the Poles or the Lithuanians. Yeah, you don't think of Poland. You think of Poland being victims of the Germans and the Russians, but they had their time when they had power. The Almoravid Empire in North Africa, 1120. I believe they were in Spain, driven out of Spain, and then El Cid was part of the war, religious war in Iberia between Christians and Muslims, when the Christians drove the Muslims out of Spain and back into North Africa. The Holy Roman Empire, which now pretty much a German empire, this was, I don't have a year for that. Okay, the Khmer Empire, 1290 in Cambodia, Angkor Wat, there's these famous ruins when Cambodia was a powerful country under the Khmers. Okay, Bulgaria, interesting, in the Balkan Empire, 927, Bulgaria, one of these small kind of really had a tough time with different dealing with Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union and having to. But apparently, the Bulgarians at one time had their empire in the Balkan Peninsula. Austria and Hungary, 1905. Yeah, this was, I think the Austrians dominated this, but again, it was a joint venture, Austrians and Hungaries, and of course they eventually separated, and but they worked together and had a pretty big empire, the Habsburg royal family. This was, and also a Germanic, because the Austrians speak German. This was another Germanic empire. The Visigoths, 580, France and Spain, one of the famous groups or countries that led to the fall of the Roman Empire, which have this reputation for barbarism. Okay, Babylon, 562 BC, Israel and Iraq, famous Hammurabi, and they're mentioned in the Bible because of the ancient Israelites. I believe they were ruled by Babylon at one time. In fact, there's a Bob Marley song they talk about by the rivers of Babylon, which references the ancient Israelites fighting for freedom against the Babylonians, and in the case of reggae, it's like African Jamaicans fighting for dignity and equal rights in Jamaica. Okay, Carthage in North Africa, made famous by Hannibal, the great Hannibal, and Carthage was the great rival of the Roman Empire. Of course, and they had their wars. The I believe the Punic Wars, but the Romans were really more powerful. And I believe, in the Second World War, General Patton was in North Africa, and maybe he was a reincarnation of Hannibal, because he had that, and he made some references to believing he had been there in the past. The Aztec Empire in Mexico, the height was 1520. Yeah, this was the other great empire that was defeated by the Spanish and became part of the Spanish Empire, Mexico. Okay, the Ashanti Empire in what's now Ghana, 1872, defeated by the British. And finally, the Sumer in Iraq, 2400 BC, first civilization. Yeah, the so-called Holy Crescent between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, Sumer or Sumeria, what they call it. What historians have traditionally called the first civilization, which I don't think is accurate, because that completely ignores past high ages. So another fascinating topic. Boy, there's just so much to learn in history, so many interesting things. So I wish you well with your historical reading and pursuits and interests. So you might consider checking out our website, Adventures in History, Peter J. Ray, at peterjray.com. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. God bless you. Take care, and I'll see you next time.